just because something is hot doesn't mean it's good, right? Some of the things are good. Some of the things that are happening you should be doing. But there's some trends out there that are really hot that everyone's doing, right? That's not good. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome to this week's edition of Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. Eric Cole. It's one of my favorite times of the week where I get to come in my studio, spend some time with you virtual and just talk about my favorite topic, which is security strategy and being a Chief Information Security Officer. Because we're still in January of 2021, we're actually doing a special episode of Life of a CISO, where we get to do one of the things I do throughout the year, which is, drum roll please, what's hot and what's not. And this is the CISO edition. So I do other editions where I go deep more into the technology, what's happening, what's occurring. For this, we're going to be focusing in on security strategy and helping you understand what is happening, what should be happening, and what you need to be aware of. Now, a little warning, because I sometimes when I have people go through my what's hot, what's not, they go, Eric, I can't believe you're endorsing that. I can't believe you're saying that's what people should do. No. Just because something is hot doesn't mean it's good, right? Some of the things are good. Some of the things that are happening you should be doing. But there's some trends out there that are really hot that everyone's doing, right? That's not good, right? So I'm going to make sure you're aware of that. So this is not what you should be doing. This is the reality as of January 2021. These are the things that are hot, and then I will explain to you whether they are good or bad, and whether you should or should not endorse those. So we're going to make sure we're giving you everything you need, because remember, on Life of a CISO, there is one goal and one goal only, and that is to make you a world-class Chief Information Security Officer. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump in to our first, what's hot and what's not. And what's hot right now is cloud-based services and data storage. With everything that's happened over the last year with the epidemic and all the challenges, organizations have moved most, if not all, of their infrastructure to the cloud. Now, I honestly believe that this is a good thing. To me, now that we have to support a remote workforce, I don't believe people are going to be going back to the office anytime soon in any large scale. Remote working is going to be that new normal. And I hate that new term, but that is what it is, right? So it's going to really come down to, we sort of have a new three-tier architecture. We have our data, our applications in the cloud. Now, this could be public-private. You can go in and secure, lock it down. There's a lot you can put in place. But then here's the big difference in my architecture. We're going to add a very robust authentication, identity management, and access control layer. And that's what was missing with a lot of these architectures. So now when somebody from home or remote office want to access any of those services, they have to go in and have robust authentication. So we're talking two-factor authentication with digital certificates, with geolocation authentication as a backup. And then we're going to be going in and having strict access control, behavioral analytics, anomaly detection for unusual activity, and really very robust monitoring to be able to detect and get unusual or unauthorized activity very, very quickly. But just the reality of having systems and services in an office that are only accessible if you're in the office is just not practical. That's just not the new reality that we're up against. And I know this is hard for some organizations because they spent 8, 9, 10 years building out this infrastructure with on-prem or private colo facilities, but that's just not going to scale. We have to be able to go in and support people working anywhere, any place, anytime. And having servers on-prem that are only accessible on-prem just isn't going to get the job done. Now, one thing I want to mention is I am a very big fan in designing out security to have air gap systems. I think in certain cases, in industrial control systems, nuclear power plants, hospitals, so some very sensitive high-risk areas, I do believe that air gaps should still exist. So there are some cases where you potentially still need people on-prem to work those systems, but that's not the normal system. So I just want to be crystal clear here that I am not endorsing that we're taking critical systems for chemical processing, nuclear power plants, or things like that, and throwing them all in the cloud. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm talking about is the traditional worker, the applications, the data, the core things they're doing, but there still needs to be potentially some isolated controlled systems. And just so we're clear, air gap means there is no connection to any outside network. It is air gapped. Unless you physically breach the perimeter and physically access the local network, there is no external way to access that network. And I always crack up where we have people that make new terms up, right? Or they change the definition of terms to fit their liking. So I was talking with some executives and they're like, yeah, Eric, we're still going in and protecting our air gap systems that are accessible from the internet. Look, wait a second. You can't say that. If it's an air gap system, it can't be accessible from the internet. I said, if your systems are accessible from the internet, those are not air gapped. Stop confusing people or misleading people or trying to pretend you have something that you don't have, right? If it's connected to the internet, it's not air gapped. And personally, I think that's probably one of the big issues we've seen out there is systems that were designed to be air gapped. If they're air gapped, they're going to have a lower level of security externally because they can't be accessed externally, right? They're going to be controlled and monitored because of the robust physical security measures that are in place. That's what they were designed for. But now what we're seeing is people taking systems that were designed, deployed, and built in an air-gapped environment and now connecting them to the internet. All bets are off, right? Because they were never built for that, right? They were never intended for that purpose. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these problems. So with a lot of these supply chain attacks out there, I think one of those problems is that we're breaking air gaps where we shouldn't. And that's what's causing issues because these systems just are not meant to handle that level of attack. So for standard business production network, we're seeing what's hot is moving all that to the cloud. The office support, the websites, the email, all that. But still in cases, we're still going to keep those air gaps isolated and physically protected in our environment. Then tied to our architecture, it's really, I call this the new normal. It's a three-tiered architecture. So for our business production systems, we're going to have our private public hybrid cloud with our data and applications. We then have that robust authentication tier or layer. And then we're going to have thin clients on the endpoint. So the way individuals are going to connect and access the cloud via that authentication layer is going to be via thin clients. And this is a big one because literally overnight, 8, 9, 10 months ago, all of a sudden organizations had to support a remote workforce and they let them use any device. So we have a lot of devices that are outdated, that are old, that have large hard drives, that aren't secure, that unfortunately is creating a huge exposure point. So one of the questions I always love asking when I talk to CIOs and CISOs and even executives is go, okay, in 2020, how many new offices did you open up? And they'll always look at me going, Eric, we didn't open up any new offices. We actually closed down 6 of our major offices. We shut down most of our major buildings. We actually closed offices. We didn't open up any new offices. I said, really? I said, how many people do you currently have working from home? And they said, well, 30,000. I said, think about it. Isn't it true that you opened up 30,000 new remote offices? And it's like, wait for it. Right? The light comes through, right? And they see, yes, if you now have 30,000 people working from a location that they previously didn't work from. That's a new office, right? You've opened up 30,000 new offices. Now, here's the problem. Normally, when your company opens up a new office, you do a site inspection. IT is involved. Security is involved. You verify and validate. You put firewalls. You lock down the wireless. You secure the infrastructure. You set up VLANs. You do all those things. But here, it was like functionality. If you have a home wireless router or internet connection, you're good to go, right? There's no checks, there's no security, there's no controls, there's no measures, right? This is problematic. So now you have all of these remote offices, sometimes 20, 30, 40,000, that have minimal to no security in place. And the biggest culprit are these desktop laptops with these gigantic hard drives, these out-of-date operating systems, and all this data out of control. So to me, probably one of the biggest challenges and problems of organizations with 2020 is all of the work on data access, data classification, data control flew out the door very, very quickly. So we now need to go in and start gaining control of that data. So thin clients actually solve multiple problems. The first problem is we can have 2, 3, 4 terabytes of corporate data sitting on an unprotected open network. That's just not acceptable. It's too big an exposure point, and it makes data classification a nightmare, if not impossible. So the first thing, by moving to thin clients, removes the local hard drive, removes the local storage, and now all of the data has to be stored in that cloud. Public-private hybrid cloud. But Eric, putting all that data, doesn't that create an exposure? Not if we do it correctly. Remember that middle tier, that authentication, identity access, authorization component, where now we're checking, validating identity, access control, monitoring. All of a sudden, that now becomes a huge, huge component. In most networks, identity and access management is one of the weakest areas that's often ignored. Now, by moving to this new 3-tiered architecture, our data is controlled and managed in one spot. We have a robust identity, access management, authentication tier. And then with a thin client, we take away the issue of exposed data or data not controlled or not managed correctly. So that's solution 1. Solution 2, when companies moved almost overnight to open up all these remote offices, anything goes. Some had corporate laptops. Some had old computers at their house. Some had computers that their kids used to play games and were infected. And they're now using that for work to control data, access all those factors. So the other issue is we totally lost control of configuration management of the endpoint. We now have no idea if it's updated, if it's out of date. I know a lot of people, when we started doing inventory with various software modules, we found XP systems that haven't been patched for 3 years, Windows 7's never patched. I mean, huge, huge problem. So now with a thin client, where there is no hard drive, there is no local operating system. So now every time you turn on your computer, you go out to a verified server, authenticate, you pull down an image, verify, integrity check it, and then you load that image. Now, that image is always up to date and fully patched. If a new patch comes out today, it will be tested, verified, put in the image, and tomorrow, when everyone turns on their computer and gets a brand new image, boom, they're patched and up to date. So it solves that problem. And then the third issue with traditional laptops with local hard drives is you typically issued a laptop for 3 or 4 years, and it was never rebuilt. So if a year into it, you click on a link or open an attachment and you get infected, you're now compromised for 2 years and have no clue or no idea that's going on. Now with our thin clients, if it's 3 p.m, you click on a link and get infected, and you stop working at 5 o'clock, you're now infected for 2 hours instead of 2 years. And even if it's ransomware, because you don't have any local data, it minimizes that overall impact. So moving to thin clients as that third tier is a huge, huge win, and a big thing you definitely want to look at. So that sort of 3-tier architecture is definitely something we want to start focusing on. Now, getting to something that is hot and shouldn't be hot and frustrates me, is blaming advanced adversaries as an excuse for not having proper security or not even knowing what's going on. I'll be fair. Let's be totally, completely fair. When these recent attacks occurred, where you had these major companies, these major software vendors, and major government entities get compromised, just watch what happened. They came out and said, we don't know what happened. We were compromised, but we don't know what happened. We don't know what caused it. We don't necessarily know how they got in. We just want to let you know that we did have a compromise, but we don't know any of the details. We don't know any of the details. So question, if you don't know any of the details and you don't know any of the specifics, then you really don't know what happened and who did it. But why is it that we can say in one sentence, we don't know what happened, but we are confident it was an advanced persistent threat. It was an advanced adversary that we wouldn't have been able to defend against. Which is it? Do you know or don't you? Right? So to me, that's the problem. Now, if it turns out that it really was, and notice my language, an advanced attack, not an advanced adversary, because remember, I don't care whether it's an advanced adversary or not. If they broke in because you had a system that was accessible from the internet, that was missing 2 years worth of patches and contained critical data that wasn't encrypted, that's unacceptable. I don't care if it's a 5-year-old or if it's an advanced adversary. If the attack was not advanced, then it should have been prevented, and companies need to step up and own that and be held responsible. So that's my concern, that it seems the trend now is as more and more attacks happen, instead of really understanding and accepting, oh, it's advanced, it's advanced, it's advanced. We couldn't have done anything about it. But oh, we don't know what happened though. But it's advanced, it's okay. Like, come on. Like, we got to do better than that. And this is one of the things I always say is, if you have a fully functional network, you will never be able to be 100% secure. I give that. Because 100% security is zero functionality. So as soon as you start adding in functionality, you're not going to have 100% security. However, that doesn't mean that some attacks can't be prevented and detected in a timely manner. Just because it's an advanced adversary, if their methods of attack were not advanced, many of these attacks are preventable and or detectable. So I just want to say that based on what I've seen, I see a disconnect here. If you don't know what happened, then how do we know? And I've seen it in the past where it's so easy for organizations just to claim advanced adversary, and we couldn't have fixed it. We couldn't have done anything about it. It's their fault, not ours. And that's just not a good trend. We have to stop that. We have to start holding ourselves accountable. We have to start putting in the core measures, and we need to start getting the facts before we start making excuses of whether something could or could not have been preventable. And then the other one under this one of what's hot, what's not, is we need to also hold ourselves accountable. When all of these attacks occurred, representatives from the various companies that were impacted, they all came forward and said, Congress must act, right? They must pass laws to hold these evil adversaries accountable for their actions, right? They must pay. We must put measures in place so we could go after them. Really? Anybody that works in security knows that the countries they're coming from, it's not necessarily illegal, and we don't have extradition treaties. And until we get this fixed with the UN, and all professionals know this is going to be 8 or 10 years out, why aren't they going to Congress and saying, why aren't there laws for minimal levels of protection securities need to implement? Why aren't we saying if a company has servers accessible from the internet that are missing patches for 6 months and contain critical customer data, my data, your data, sensitive data, and wasn't properly encrypted, why aren't they being held liable? Why isn't there a negligence component going after them? Right? To me, that's the frustration. That these vendors just want to go public and say, it was somebody else's fault, go after them, you should arrest them, I'm good. No, right? We're all in this together. Me too, right? We all have to own this, and as security professionals, we have to stop deceiving the public, saying everything is advanced, and saying that we have to pass laws to punish the foreign adversaries, when in reality, we can do a much, much better job at protecting and securing our infrastructure. Next one, what's hot, what's not, is once again, it's unfortunate, but a lot of companies still believe they can achieve prevention. They can prevent all attacks. Let me help you out. There's no possible way, because preventive measures can only block things that are 100% bad 100% of the time. So if you have something that's bad 90% of the time, you can't block it. Because if you prevented something that 90% of the time was bad, that means you're blocking 10% of legitimate attacks. You're blocking 10% of legitimate communication, and that is totally and completely unacceptable. So preventive measures by nature, it's math. They have to have zero false positives, which means they're going to have high false negatives. They're going to miss attacks. That's the nature of a preventive measure. So we can prevent what we can. And yes, some of these attacks could have been prevented. Not all, but some. But we have to stop thinking that prevention will get the job done. We need to invest a lot more in detection. If in the recent attack, one of the signatures, to use that term loosely, was large amounts of outbound traffic. Well, one of the general premises of security is all outbound traffic must go through proxies that are doing basic behavioral analytics on it. Once again, from everything I've seen, and new information comes out, but from everything I've seen, if you had all your outbound traffic going through a proxy that did behavioral analytics, you would have caught this attack and this anomaly within hours or minutes, because it was that distinct a profile. Now, if things change, I'll reevaluate, but at least from what I've initially seen, that's the initial data we're getting. So why didn't we put more measures in place? Also, with supply chain, one of the general rules of boundary defense is anytime you're crossing trust levels, so you're going external, internal, vendor to company, you always go through a firewall with a filtering and a DMZ. So these are rules and principles of security we've had out for a long time. Yet clearly, if you have a third party, vendor's software or servers on your premise, and it got infected and it spread across your network, clearly it wasn't segmented. Clearly you weren't doing boundary defense. Clearly you weren't putting those principles in place. And if there was this huge signature that could have been detected and we didn't, once again, there's these fundamental principles of security that we need to start following, we need to start implementing, and we need to start putting in place to protect and secure our systems. This is sort of tied to the first two, but I think it's an important one. What's hot is location-agnostic architectures. I don't know what the future holds. Heck, I keep saying it's going to get better and better, but I mean, it's just to the point of crazy now, and I'm going to leave it at that, so I don't get myself into any trouble here. But this is something we started predicting in 2018, 2019. Clients of ours that we closely work with and that listen to what we say, they were prepared for COVID. We had what we call 2020 architecture that with most of our clients, we rolled out December 2019 or January 2020, and it was basically location agnostic. Thin client, backup hard drive for traveling on airplanes, full authentication layer, the 3 tiers I laid out. So when COVID hit, it was just business as usual. Right? They had it all set. It wasn't a big deal. The architecture was there. So as we move forward, regardless of whether we go back in offices, we don't go back in offices, whatever that new is, right? It's definitely going to be a location agnostic architecture. This idea that if you're on premise, you can access information, and if you're not, you can't, and vice versa, isn't going to get the job done. Once again, air gap is the exception. We still, with some of our high-end international clients in oil and gas, we still have air gap. We still have different measures and components in place for that, but we're talking about the standard business style network that has to go location agnostic. What's hot? Zero trust security. Once again, it's the concept. I know the word is very buzzwordy, right? Everyone's like, every interview I go on that's technical and podcast and shows, everyone's like, zero trust, right? And everyone rolls their eyes. But what we're really talking about is you need to go in and protect each system individually. I know there's more formal definitions, but what we're really talking about here is that every system is independent. And if one system gets compromised, it shouldn't make it any easier to break into any other system. But basically, a very agnostic environment where every system is independent, every system is controlled, protected, and monitored. And that's really, if you look at the idea of that 3-tier where we're doing thin clients, isolated, middle tier, it's really a hybrid zero trust security where we're really isolating, controlling, and managing the risk across all of our different assets. And yes, those of you that are academic and don't hold me to it. I know there's formal definitions, but I'm just giving from a strategic CISO level what we're really looking at and what's hot. And I knew this was coming. I love artificial intelligence. I think it has a lot of value and benefit. I've worked in it for 20 years. I built some amazing systems that we could not have done without neural networks, expert systems, and back propagation. But the point is, it's not the holy grail that everyone thought. I remember multiple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago when I went to the conferences, I would go to these big security events where they had 20,000 people, thousands of vendors, and I would always try to say, why are some booths crowded and some aren't? And what I noticed a couple of years ago is any booth that had AI or artificial intelligence was packed. And anything that didn't was, it was like, AI is going to solve everything. Let me help you out here. Artificial intelligence is very valuable when you have a very accurate data set that you can train it on. Weather systems is a perfect example. Weather hasn't changed that much over the last 20, 30 years. Yes, the jet stream moves up and down and all those pieces, but the general predictive, when you look at all, and I'm not a meteorologist, but when you look at all of the different parameters, when certain things happen, it indicates rain. When certain things happen, it indicates snow. Those are very, very stable. So if you now understand those very stable predictive data points and you have 20 years of stable data, you can build an amazing AR system. The problem with cybersecurity is it's always changing. It's always modifying. So I can go in and build an amazing AI system of the threats of 10 years ago. But that's not the threats today. And as soon as we build a system for today's threats, they change. So one of the problems and challenges with AI is because the attacks are always changing. The data set are not going to be historically significant like in other areas. Not saying we can't solve it, but I think everyone just said, oh, if we throw AI at it, we'll instantly solve world hunger. And unfortunately, just not the case. This one is another one that it frustrates me. I wish it wasn't true, but I still see this. What's hot is, Eric, we're not a target. Nobody's going to come after us. I mean, this year I've had so many meetings with CEOs where I'm like, listen, and this is how confident I am. I went into them and I said, I mean, we're talking a couple $100,000 contract. We're talking pretty big gigs, $200,000, $300,000. And I said, listen, if I come into your organization and you are not compromised, there's no sign of compromise, and your security is A or better, not A plus, A or better, I will not charge you. I will give you the entire assessment, roadmap, threat hunt, totally and completely free. That's how confident I am that organizations are wrong. Because I talk to them and go, Eric, we don't need to spend $200,000 on security or $50,000 or $20,000, whatever it is, because we're not a target. No one's going to target us. No one's going to come after us. We're not a concern. We don't have to worry about it. And then here's my favorite. Eric, we have had no attacks over the last 2 years. We're good. Let me get this straight. Every other company like yours, every other company in your industry, every other company on planet Earth is getting attacked all the time. But you're saying you haven't had any attacks in 24 months. Could it be that you're getting attacked and you just didn't detect it. Because let's face it, if you're telling me that you haven't been attacked in 2 years, yet everyone else is, it means one of two things. Either you have magical unicorn grade security that nobody else has, or maybe you're just not looking in the right spot. So to me, I hope what becomes what's hot is organizations recognize that if they haven't been attacked in 12 months, it means they're attacked, they just didn't detect it, and they aggressively do threat hunting in their environment. But that's really the solution here. Everybody is a target. Cybersecurity is your responsibility, and we need to start upping that game. And then this is another big trend. This is one of my newer pieces of research that I call the 90% security. Because here's what puzzled me. I would go in and study. I did a lot of research on all these attacks over the last 5 years, and almost all of the large data breaches, almost all are going to go in, and they have a system accessible from the internet the company wasn't aware of. It was missing patches. It contained critical data that wasn't properly encrypted. And I'm sitting there going, wait a second. These are Fortune 50, Fortune 100. These are top hotel chains. These are international known pharmaceutical companies. And I want to believe that they don't have asset inventory, patching, or data control. I just didn't want to believe that. So I started researching. What I realized is in most of these organizations, now I call it 90% because it has a nice ring to it. It probably is 95, 96, 97. But the point is this. Most companies have 90% asset inventory. They have 90% patching, and they have 90% data encryption. The problem is if you have 1,000 servers and 90% are secure, that's 100 that you don't know about that are missing patches that contain critical data that's not properly protected. So when it comes to the foundational items, which are asset inventory, patching, configuration management, and data protection, for internet-facing systems, you must be 100%. You must know 100% about all internet-facing systems. Every internet-facing system must be fully patched. If it can't, it's not worthy to be on the internet. And internet-facing systems never, ever contain critical data. Those are my non-negotiables. Everything else, when we do CISO work for you, is on the table, but those are non-negotiables. You need to make sure you have asset inventory, 100% for internet-facing systems. You want to make sure that you're going in and they are fully patched. And you also want to make sure that you are never putting critical data on internet-facing systems. And then, sort of as we wrap up, ignoring security, thinking it will go away. Oh, if I just ignore it, it's going to go away. It's not going to buy. It's a trend. It's a fad. Cybersecurity is the number one threat facing organizations, the government, and the world. And it is not being made the priority that it needs to be. In almost all cases, whether it's the government, whether it's the business, or everything else, cybersecurity is always in the top 5. It's often the top 3. But the problem is it's never number 1, so it gets ignored. This problem is a lot bigger than we think. Most organizations are compromised more than they realize and are a target. But because there's no visible signs, they're ignoring it. And that is a huge, huge problem. And that's one of the number 1 reasons why I'm on a mission to make cyberspace a safe place to live, work, and raise a family, and why I'm focused on creating world-class CISOs. That's why for the last 6 months, I've dedicated pretty much my life to building out a CISO cert, because a world-class CISO cert does not exist. So if you are interested, please go to secure-anchor.com/CISO. And we are running this class. It's filling up quick. But if you want to be a world-class CISO, our CISO cert has knowledge transfer, over 40 hours of knowledge transfer. It has live group coaching with me. And it has a peer group where you can build relationships with other CISOs. So if you want to be a world-class CISO, if you want to change the world and make cyberspace safe, join me. Go to www.secure.com secure-anchor.com/CISO. Sign up for a consultation. Contact me, ecole@secure-anchor.com. And I hope you enjoyed this session of What's Hot, What's Not on Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. Eric Cole.